Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again in the series of lives that the United States Spiritist Federation brings to all of you every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Today, we're having our special guest, Edward Christie, that is going to be talking about the logic of reincarnation. And today is a very special day because it is Edward's birthday, but he's giving us the gift. So it will be great to have him here in such a special day. Before we get to Edward, as usual, we are going to prepare this beginning of the presentation, this ambience, and everything for us to connect with our spiritual friends through our initial prayer. So please join me. And if you feel better, comfortable, more concentrated, let's close our eyes and pray. Thank you, spiritual friends, for this morning, for this opportunity that we have to listen to the lessons that Spiritism has to bring to us. Please inspire our special guest, Edward Christie, so that he can touch our hearts and enlighten us so we can bring to our lives these lessons and work in our inner transformation all the time. And so be it. So, hi, Edward. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So, Edward, before we let you bring these lessons to us, we are going, let me introduce you more formally for those who don't know too much yet about you. So just a brief introduction. And right after, make sure that during the presentation, send your questions because right after we're going to open for questions. So Edward Christie has been involved with Spiritism for more than 20 years and is an active member of the Inner Enlightenment Spiritist Society. Edward is a classically trained pianist, has taught music in New York City schools, as well as computer science courses at NYU. He enjoys learning and uses his love of teaching to share what he has learned with others, and we appreciate that. So now, Edward, again, welcome, and the word is yours.
Thank you, Tanya. When you asked me to speak on my birthday, I thought, what a great gift to be able to be in the company of friends and to be able to talk about things that really touch our heart and things that leave a permanent mark on our lives. So thank you all for, whether or not you were thinking to celebrate my birthday, thank you for celebrating it with me. Let's start this look at the logic of reincarnation with 3 questions. First, do you believe in reincarnation? Second, if you believe, did it make sense to you the first time you heard it? And if you believe, has it made a difference in your life? Humans are always asking questions. Science categorizes us as Homo sapiens, that is, a wise or rational man, but we might just as rightly be called Homo curiosum, inquisitive man. We're inquisitive because we're creatures who seek answers. We ask questions because we have doubts about ourselves, the world we live in, and what we're doing here. Some questions, like what we're doing here and what happens when we die, are so persistent that we have to hold beliefs even if we lack hard evidence. Yet answers to questions about life and death matter. It's our idea about death that determines how we live. Allan Kardec had questions, so many that a good part of his writing is in question and answer format. Kardec seems to think in questions. Questioning is the art of learning. because questions focus our attention on what we want to know. Playwright Eugene Ionesco said, "It's not the answer that enlightens, but the question." Theoretical physicist Werner Heisenberg said, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." The philosopher Voltaire said, "Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers." And Socrates maintains that he's wise because I know that I know nothing, reminding us that after all our questions and all our answers, we're still deeply uncertain about what we can and can't know. We don't have to look too hard. I'm sorry about that. We don't have to look too hard to see that humans differ from one another. And so we ask questions. Why is there so much variety among humans? What accounts for our physical differences? Why does a skill or a talent come easy to some? What's the source of the difference in intelligence among us? These questions lead to others. Why are some born into poverty and others into prosperity? Why do some live long lives while others are cut short by illness? And why are people born blind, hearing and speech impaired, and afflicted with terrible diseases while others have every physical advantage? When I first heard that reincarnation can answer these questions, I admit I was skeptical. The answers didn't seem to require a belief in reincarnation, and reincarnation just added complexity, and I was looking for simplicity. After all, I thought, humans are similar but not the same, and we think it's normal that people think, look, and act differently. The reason some die young or are born without sight or came into the world with a congenital disorder could easily stem from the same reason that some are short or smart or skinny. The way I hear it, our traits are a result of heredity, passed down through genetics, explained by natural selection, and confirmed by our belief in evolution. And accidents happen, an unfortunate coincidence, a momentary distraction, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, natural disasters, and countless of other causes for misfortune could shorten or derail a life. Why couldn't natural causes, science, and misfortune explain why everyone doesn't enjoy the same health, similar abilities, and an equally long life? I might have allowed my modern scientific view to answer these questions, except I had some nagging thoughts. Where was my belief that I'm more than this body? What about the idea that my actions have consequences in this life and beyond? What does this explanation do to guide me to live a moral life? And especially, where was God? How did my belief in an all-good, all-loving creator fit in this picture? After years of resistance and objections, I slowly admitted that reincarnation brought these three things together: a good God, our immortal soul, and our differences. Once I admitted my belief in God, I had to look again at the questions of why the circumstances of life differ. Start with the premise that every effect has a cause. The universe and the humans that live in it exist, so they too must have a cause. We call that cause God. Since nothing's created without a design, God's both the cause of our existence and the author of its design. And our differences are clearly part of that design. Without God, our differences are reduced to natural forces. Differences happen by some combination of our parents' genes and how they raised us and the place where we were raised. And to an extent, this is true. But nature and nurture can't account for all of our differences. We come into this life with inborn traits. Ask anyone who's raised a child, and they'll tell you that each one comes with its own personality, its own interests, temperaments, and talents. And these are obvious when the child's only an infant. How can random gene mutations and environmental factors alone explain these? When we believe in God, we're still part of the natural world. We have parents who passed on their genes to us, raised us in their own way and in a particular place. But these factors alone don't account for inborn traits. So where do they come from? If nature and nurture can't account for all of our differences and traits, then the logic that our differences are the result of genetic reshuffling or our upbringing is faulty, or at least insufficient. We live in a world where differences exist. We could even say that our Creator favors variety because we see so much of it. This leaves us with two possibilities. Either God's responsible for our differences, or we, his creations, his co-creators, caused them. Let's stay with this idea that differences come from superhuman causes. We're different because God created us different as a result of God's pleasure. If this is true, then God's playing favorites. He created some sighted and others blind, some weak and others strong, some clever and others dim, some gifted and others without talent. Wait, but that doesn't seem right. After all, even human manufacturers recall defective products that don't meet a standard of perfection. You'd think that an all-knowing creator wouldn't intentionally create defective work or allow it to happen. Instead, his creatures would reflect his perfection. What if I say that God is responsible for our differences, but the cause of those differences is the result of some mystery of God's design and the human mind can never know it? If the reason for our differences are hidden in mystery, then not only are our answers, the answers to our questions are meaningless, but so are the questions. If we can't get intelligible answers to our question, then we can't be sure what life is for or why we exist at all. Ask, what's the meaning of my life? And you're left to figure out the best answer you can find. And your answer might be right, or could be wrong. What measure could you use to decide if you're right or wrong? If the reasons for our existence is hidden in mystery, then the best we can do is answer our own questions and decide for ourselves what the meaning of our life is. Say instead of mystery, we explain these differences as an effect of chance. Then we have a God that doesn't show us what's good. See, chance means that any outcome is just as likely as any other outcome. How can we tell the difference between a good and a bad life if the outcome of our actions is controlled by the flip of a coin? If chance rules life, it doesn't much matter which way we choose. Good and bad have no objective meaning, and the idea that we're responsible for our decisions is empty. Humans have the power to create, and this gives us the ability to bring new things into existence. We didn't, however, create our lives, and we didn't create ourselves. A creator designs and gives purpose to the things it creates. Since we're not our own creators, we can't ultimately decide what our life's final purpose is. A belief in a providential plan for humans means that the mind of God is behind everything that happens, however fuzzy our vision of that mind is. We see that the world is created by God with a purpose, and behind this purpose is God's love for his creation and for us. And this means that God has a good end in mind for all of his creation. It'd be a cruel cosmic joke to give us the desire for answers that can't be satisfied, and the ability to choose without having choice have a meaning. So to live the purposeful life God intends for us, it can't be based on favoritism or mystery or chance. It rubs against our human nature to imagine life as a series of mysterious, meaningless acts. We're built, humans are built to look for meaning. Now, if our differences aren't fully explained by mystery, chance, or favoritism, or materialism, well, where do they come from? Reincarnation, the belief that after the body dies, some aspect of a living being continues to exist in a new physical body, offers an answer that satisfies and gives our life meaning and direction. It reveals the principle governing the conditions of our life that account for our differences. That principle is cause and consequence. It explains that human actions create consequences, and these consequences are what's responsible for bringing about our differences. This understanding has its root deep in human history, and it's notable how on many points ancient religions and Spiritism agree. Hinduism, for example, the world's oldest religion, teaches that karma begins with the idea that every action has a consequence. When we say what goes around comes around and you reap what you sow, we're voicing the law of karma. But saying that every action has a consequence is just the beginning. There are two important concepts that emerge from this fundamental idea. The first concept is ethical. Karma isn't just a mathematical causal relation where an action's consequence is the same regardless of a person's intent. There's a consequence for every action, but there's not a fixed, predetermined consequence for each action. Karma isn't tit for tat, that if I take someone's life, that means someone's going to take mine. Instead, karma is an ethical principle. What matters is a person's intention and desires before and during an action. The second concept that flows from karma is temporal, that between an action and its consequence is a period of time, and that this interval can span more than one lifetime. If every action has a consequence, then one can't exist without the other. If I throw a rock, its movement must conform to the law of cause and consequence. The rock won't stay in the air indefinitely, and it won't just vanish. The rock will eventually land. Consequences don't materialize out of thin air. If something's happening in our life and we can't find a reason, that doesn't mean there's no cause. It means we can't find the cause in this life, so it had to occur in some previous life. The consequences of our actions today will bear fruit tomorrow, no matter how long it takes for that tomorrow to come. A Buddhist master once said, if you want to know your past life, look at your present condition. And if you want to know your future life, look at your present actions. Spiritism has much in common with the ancient belief of karma. It explains that the circumstances of our life, both good and bad, can be traced back to actions in our past, a past that could have been in a previous existence. We're not always sure about what brought about our present condition. In fact, we often aren't. But reason tells us that it has to be a consequence of past actions. Karma reveals God's design for his creation and the love that God has for us. God gives us as many chances and as many lives as we need to work out the consequences of our actions to an end that intends the good for all of creation. As we heard, karma is an ethical principle. When we act, our intention has an effect on the consequences. This is why karma isn't simply a mechanical principle. A person's desire to live his life guided by a set of moral rules has a decisive effect on the nature of an action's consequence. There's a difference between doing something when we know it's wrong and doing the same thing without that knowledge. When we suffer because of a past wrongdoing, it doesn't mean that we acted that way because human nature itself is bad. Our existence started in ignorance, and we acted harmfully because in some way we didn't foresee the negative consequences of our actions. We can feel guilty or hate ourselves for our wrongdoing, but guilt and hate don't cure ignorance. Self-hatred leads to self-punishment, saying that I'm bad and I deserve to suffer. The problem with self-punishment is that it blinds us to the source of our harmful actions, which is our ignorance, and keeps us feeling guilty, which does nothing to help lessen our ignorance. We can also be proud and feel superior for our good deeds, but we don't have to give in to these feelings either. Self-love leads to self-glorification, and we have to guard against using pride as a way of avoiding to face the limits of our understanding and the constant need we have to work against our ignorance. Instead of self-hatred and self-glorification, we see that the trials and the happiness we experience are merely the working out of cause and consequence. The trials we face are a result of natural consequences and not a punishment for past deeds, just as our happiness is the result of natural consequences and not a reward for something good we've done. Karma isn't a judge that hands out rewards and punishment, but simply a force that governs the consequences of our previous actions. When we act selfishly and harm or deceive or manipulate others for our own ends, unpleasant consequences will occur. What about the temporal aspect of karma? That is, how a cause and consequence related to time? Well, if each action has a consequence, the next question is, how long will it take for a consequence of an action to occur? Can it be that the consequence of every one of our actions is completed by the time our life ends? History is full of examples showing that the actions of people who live lives that have ended continue to affect the lives of the living. But consequences also affect the life of the person who caused the action. Even the smallest action, like throwing a rock, produces a change in energy that affects the person who caused the action. If the consequence of an action isn't completed when I die, it doesn't just vanish. Something must be left of me to experience the consequences of my action. Therefore, some aspect of my life must continue after my death. We call this aspect the immortal soul, and it's the soul that remains when life runs out. I could deny the idea that I have to experience the consequences of my action by saying that everything I do is to benefit others. So long as others enjoy the benefit of my actions, there's no need for me to experience the consequences. But which of us has the power to make himself immune to the consequences of his actions, good or bad? And what if instead of a selfless attitude, I take the selfish position and say that everything I do is calculated to benefit me? Does this guarantee that I'll undergo the consequences of all my actions before I die? If we admit that we have free will in our actions and that our actions are affected by our intentions, then we're responsible for our actions and can't escape their consequences. See, the flip side of having freedom of action is that we're responsible for the actions we commit. Once we acknowledge that we live consecutive lives, we also accept that what we're unable to complete in one life will finish in another. If I think that the consequences of my actions are swept away with my last breath, there's no need for me to accept my responsibility for anything that I do. Why would I bother to work against selfishness and pride? Why not use every circumstance to my advantage? Why care about others? Why be kind or gentle or peaceful? Why not give in to every desire I have? Without a belief that I experience the consequences of my actions, Jesus' teachings to live a good life hardly make any sense at all. Jesus tells us that life's purpose is larger than fulfilling our moment-to-moment needs because the soul carries the weight of its actions and the fruit of its understanding beyond this life. How does each existence help us to change so that we lessen our ignorance and live an ethical life? Nothing is created without a design. This is also true of the type of existence that's drafted for each individual before being born. This blueprint for life governs the kind of body we have, the place of our birth, and the family we're born into, the material conditions of life. The blueprint also includes the type of trials that an individual chooses to undergo, which occur as a natural consequence of the material conditions. Our material life is predestined. We can't, for example, change the place where we were born or the color of our eyes. But this is not true of our moral life. We're not fated to carry out a particular action, right or wrong. Humans have free will, which gives us freedom of thought and freedom of action. We aren't following a moment-to-moment script like an actor in a play or a puppet on a string. Instead, in each existence, we're presented with trials and can make ethical choices that provide a way for us to work out the effects of our past actions of this and any other life we've lived. The physical trials we encounter are in some way predestined, but not how we respond to those events. We're free to choose to meet each of life's challenges using our free will and our intelligence. So, how do you discover this design? To know it, it's very simple. You only have to look around you. Look at who are your parents, your relatives, your spouses, children, friends, neighbors, the work you do, the place you live, the troubles that follow you wherever you go, and talents that come as second nature. Look at these, and you'll see the work that's cut out for you in this life. We ignore this work when we create a fictitious life, a life that we hope for but don't have, a life full of people we'll never meet, opportunities that never materialize, responsibilities that won't be given to us, and talents that exist only as wishful thinking. Creating a fictitious life not only wastes the one we have, but also rejects the design of this existence that's needed for our own good. When we place conditions on our happiness, when we can only be happy if life were different, we're actually placing restrictions on our free will because we're placing limits on the choices we can make. These limits, these artificial limits, turn our will into a hostage, demanding satisfaction from what we think we need before we'll set our will free. We make peace with the conditions of this life when we admit that not only do we have everything that we need, but also live in an abundance of gifts to refine our understanding, to make amends for our mistakes, and to bring beauty and harmony into our lives and the lives of others around us. We don't need to wait for an incarnation autopsy report to find out what we should have learned. We can spend a lot of time worrying about what we might have done and what others have done to us and speculating on who the people in our life might have been to us in the past. Yet if we accept each consecutive existence as God's generous gift, we can focus our attention on the true work of this incarnation, to grow in love by forgiving and seeking forgiveness. St. Francis took Jesus' words, "Forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us," as the means out of ignorance and towards love. You see, Francis welcomed afflictions and trials because he understood that each one was an opportunity to forgive, so that he could be forgiven of the unloving things that he had done. He understood the workings of cause and consequence and the goodness of God who provided it as a path for love. When we see cause and consequence play itself out in the lives of others, love asks us to resist thinking that people deserve to suffer. Instead, we recognize that ignorance brought them to their condition. And so our proper response is to be patient and generous with them, and in that way, model the love that God shows us when we suffer. When suffering is deep, we meet it with a love that's just as deep. Regardless of the kind of suffering, a short life, an illness, an accident, or reversal of fortune, a belief in reincarnation asks us to respond with a heart overflowing with forgiveness and compassion. When we understand the working out of actions and their consequences, it gives meaning to our trials. It fills us with hope because it shows us that ignorance and not evil causes suffering, and ignorance is curable. Reincarnation is based on a belief that in previous lives, as well as future lives. If this is true, why can't I remember my previous lives? If my present life is the sum of my previous existence, doesn't this forgetfulness put me at a disadvantage? After all, if I can't remember lessons I've learned, how can I be held responsible for not learning them? How can I be expected to profit from my previous experiences? Our endless curiosity leads us to ask many questions, and the ones we ask about previous lives may seem valuable. But once we admit that our past experiences are obscure, probing prior lives won't bring us closer to the truth about our present life. Often the desire to know what happened in the past stems from idle curiosity, the desire to know just for the sake of knowing. And this sidetracks us from the true work of this life. The Buddha has a parable that illustrates this idea. A man was hit by a poisoned arrow, and his friends and relatives found a doctor able to remove the arrow. If this man were to say, "I won't have this arrow taken out until I know whether the person who shot it was a priest or a prince or a merchant, what his name was and who his family was, and what kind of bow was used, and whether the arrowhead was an ordinary one or an iron one," that man would die before all these things are ever known to him. This parable tells us that what's important is to get rid of that arrow and not waste precious time finding out who shot it. While it's true that we don't have explicit memories of the past, the lessons we learned aren't wasted. They are retained in our conscience and our innate ideas. Our conscience and our innate ideas preserve the knowledge we've acquired to do good and resist wrongdoing. By the way, just as an aside, it's easy to confuse the words conscience and consciousness. They're so close sometimes when I try to say them, I say one rather than the other. I say the wrong word. So consciousness is our awareness of ourselves and the world around us. And conscience is our ability to distinguish between right and wrong, two very different things. Our innate ideas are inborn intuitions when we sense an automatic attraction to do good and a gut level aversion that warns us to avoid repeating harmful behavior we carried out in the past. Innate ideas are an echo of things we've learned in the past. That echo is the voice of conscience, our natural capacity to use reason to choose between right and wrong, and keeps us from acting on our most basic desires. Our conscience is at work when we feel guilty after doing something bad, and feel at peace when we've done something kind or loving. It guides us so we avoid repeating mistakes we've made in the past. We develop our conscience when we use our intelligence, guided by the teachings of Jesus. Here are some of the words that we can use to help us develop our conscience. If we make our livelihood by serving others, Jesus teaches us that he who humbles himself shall be exalted. If we're surrounded by conflict and war and anger, we remain calm, remembering Jesus' words, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." If we have adversaries, we reconcile with them, recalling Jesus' guarantee that if you forgive men when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. If we lack material comforts, we're consoled when Jesus tells us not to store up for yourselves treasures on earth where worms and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where worms and rust do not destroy and thieves do not break in. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Since we live multiple lives, are there any limits to the kind of body into which we are incarnated? Can we believe in the ancient Greek concept of metempsychosis, where spirits return in a new body that can be a human or an animal? Could a spirit that once incarnated as human be reborn as, say, an insect? The Greek concept of metempsychosis comes from Plato, who tells us a legend that shows how the choices we make and the character we acquire while we're alive have consequences after we die. In the myth of Er, we hear that Er returned to life 12 days after his death and described what he saw in the other world. He watched souls returning from heaven and choosing new lives, both human and animal. There were men passing into animals and animals changing into each other. The souls of those who don't believe in the possibility that humans can live a good life chose an animal body for their future incarnation. And those with a good character made good choices when granted options for a new life and chose to live in a human body. In the Indian religious tradition, every being has a soul and immortal life. They consider insects and plants and animals to be forms of humans. Since rebirth is controlled by karma, extreme misconduct in one life could demand a spiritual setback in a future life, and this setback is satisfied by a rebirth in a non-human body. Since non-humans lack the consciousness needed for self-improvement, spiritual growth is suspended and remains stationary until its karma is worn out. The belief that a human spirit can be reborn into a non-human body has no place in Spiritist belief. Spiritist teaches that humans have an individualized spirit that constantly strives towards deeper levels of intellectual and moral progress. To do this work, a human spirit requires a material body specifically adapted to that nature. A human spirit enters into a new phase of existence and has no way to return to its former primitive state. A human spirit could no more return in the body of an animal than a butterfly could return to its larval state and become a caterpillar, or a frog become a tadpole, or an adult human return to its mother's womb. The spirit has outgrown its need for these former types of existences because what was good for it then is no longer useful. Yet we're told that we're indebted to these ancient beliefs because among their errors are also truths. Like Jesus, Buddha used parables so that the simple village people he spoke to could understand his teachings. Buddha's fearful image of being reborn as an animal or insect isn't meant to be taken literally. He used it as a moral lesson to teach people to live as humans and not as animals, for fear that they may be reborn as one. And while Spiritism has no use for the Hindu belief that a human can return as an animal or a bird, this belief reminds us that all life forms are worthy of respect. We're related to every living creature, and so we're in a moral relation to everything that lives. Our moral life is defined by our conduct towards all of nature, because all of nature is of the divine and therefore is related to us. I see my battery is low. With some luck, I'll be able to make it all the way through. Would I be able to pause just a minute? I'm sorry, I thought I was fully recharged. Just a moment, please. Oh, okay. This, then, is the logic of reincarnation. We start naturally with questions. Why do people differ in intelligence, talents, and interests? Why are benefits and misfortunes, vices and virtues unequally distributed among people? We aren't creators of ourselves or the world around us. We're creatures. Take this one. As creatures of an intelligent and loving creator, the reason for our differences can't be favoritism or chance or mystery or strict materialism. Instead, reincarnation provides a clear and lucid answer to why humans differ. Differences result from the consequences of previous actions that each person makes using her free will and intelligence. Every action is powered by our intention to do good or ill. A person's intention has a decisive effect on the consequences and plays a crucial role in our misfortunes and prosperity. And if we can't find the cause of a condition in our life, the action that caused it had to take place before our birth, leading us to reason that we've been born many times. Across each birth, there's an enduring aspect of our existence that persists, and we call this our immortal soul. The immortal soul experiences the consequences of its actions across many births, and this accounts for our differences. The body created for us in each incarnation is appropriately made to experience the consequences of our actions and is compatible with the knowledge of what we've learned. The soul retains the memory of these multiple lives, and this is reflected in its innate ideas and conscience. Reincarnation isn't only a belief that finds a place in our rational thinking, it's also a seed that takes root in the heart. I continue to struggle with my belief in reincarnation, not because I doubt it's true, but because of the power it has to make a difference in how I live, to see how it touches every moment of my life, every decision I make, every word I speak, every thought I think. To accept that in this life, that I have the roles of being a son, a brother, a husband, and a father. To remember that as a spirit, I'm none of these. To respect my limitations as well as those of others. To be of service to all those whose lives join my own. To work against ignorance. To love deeply. To forgive always. Just one more question. How does reincarnation give insight to the meaning of divine justice? Human justice is based on the theory of legal equality that regards everyone as equal under the law. If God's justice were like this, all humans would have the same abilities, intelligences, and opportunities. But this doesn't describe humanity, does it? So God's justice must differ in some way from human justice. It can't, however, be so different that we say, we'll never understand God's justice. In Matthew's gospel, the first word that Jesus speaks is repent. With this word, Jesus tells us to change our thinking, to recalculate our path, to rethink, to turn ourselves around. If divine and human justice have nothing in common, how do we know what Jesus is asking us to turn to? Divine and human justice differ, but they aren't as different as day is from night. They differ more in the way of our drawing of a line compares to a perfect line. We can try to draw a perfect line only because we have some idea of what a perfect line should look like. All of us have an innate sense of justice, just as all of us have an innate sense of right and wrong. Human justice is our attempt to conform our notion of justice with God's. The crucial difference between divine and human justice, what keeps us from drawing that straight line, that straight perfect line, is that God's justice is not separated from his mercy. The justice of God is in his mercy, and the mercy of God is in his justice. Thomas Aquinas says that when we try to practice justice, mercy dies in our soul. And if we show mercy, justice is buried. When we hear someone say, justice has been served, it means that someone will be punished for a crime they've committed. This is an example of human justice, a desire that wants to see justice carried out right now in this life. And of course, there's a place for this kind of justice. But how is justice served when we commit an error against divine law? The kind of thing that won't land us in prison. Like when we use people for our own ends, when our words deceive, when our actions manipulate, when we blacken a person's name. How long will it take for justice to be served then? God could show his justice by preventing us from wrongdoing. He could violate our free will. But instead, his mercy brings good out of our offenses. God's justice and mercy are perfectly balanced and gives us the time we need to seek forgiveness for our wrongdoings and to make amends for them at our own speed. God respects our limitations and never asks us to go beyond our strength. God's mercy is ready to forgive a sorrowful heart, and his justice doesn't punish. Whatever harm we do to ourselves or others, God's love for us is unharmed. The logic of reincarnation is rooted in love. We're created from God's love, and so our nature is saturated with his love. From God comes the force of love which moves all things, and all things seek their completeness in God. This is what St. Augustine meant when he prayed to God, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you." All things are moving towards God, not because we're powerless against his will, but because his love is attractive and draws us towards that end that we can delay, but not avoid. We are co-creators in God's work of love, and when we contribute to the good in the world, we participate in God's justice and experience the mercy God extends to all his creatures. We have the freedom to create, and this brings us face to face with the demand of charity. Once our wrongs are washed clean, once karma is worn out, all that's left will be charity. Our differences are basic to this creative love, and it's because of our limitations that we need others and others need us. Reincarnation calls us to continue God's work of love, to see the goodness in each other, to take pleasure in the beauty in all of creation, and to meet the truth that life continues. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Edward. It was a lot, like you said, a lot of questions that cause us to really think about everything and understand this logic of reincarnation, a very nice way for us to understand all these lessons. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
And how, the mercy of God in all this, that's always something that fascinates me, to think that life can be always for the better, and we are always learning and evolving and making the best of everything that happens to us, right? So let's see. Now we have some questions from the audience, and we have some time. So are you ready?
Yes.
Good. So is there such a thing as good and bad luck? Is that we call chance?
It's hard for us to understand that we participate in every event that happens in life. It's easy for us to think that we're just spectators, and that things just I was just standing there and this happened to me. That we participate in some way. Maybe it's in a very, very small way, but there's nothing that happens to us in our life that we don't participate in. And I think when we start to see that, when we start to become aware of our participation in life and in events in life, we can start to see, start to really understand ourselves and what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we take the responsibility, right? Instead of just, oops, that happened, right?
Right, yeah. And this, of course, extends to our relations, especially our relations to other people. We say, I did everything right.
Yeah.
But we don't really realize how, I've often said, I think that one of the most painful things that could happen to me is if someone videotaped me for an entire day and I had to sit there and watch it, how I treat people, with the things I say, and how I act. And we don't realize that the things that we do that seem to be so normal and natural to us can really have a great effect on the people around us.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Let's see one more question. Oh, from Kirsten. How can we attenuate past wrongs in the present incarnation?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the things, as I alluded to in the previous answer, one of the things that we have to do is really be aware of the things that happen around us and not become, I guess, what's normally called a victim of what happens. In some way, we have to accept the responsibility of our conditions, which means to look around us and find out. You know, we're married to the person that we need to be married to. We're living in the city that we need to live in, and if we think that that's not true, then we reject everything that's good that's around us. So I think that's the first thing to do, is to accept where you are is where you should be. And then really pay attention to what's going on, because everything that's happened, you know, we don't get a consequence just doesn't come out of midair. There was a cause somewhere, and if all we see is the consequences, you know, why is this happening to me? I don't understand why I'm a good person and I've done everything right and this still happens to me. There's no such thing as a consequence without a cause. They go together.
Yeah, kind of learning from things instead of just seeing what is going on and feeling sorry about the situation, right? And also, I guess it's when we cannot sometimes go back and undo things, right? But we can definitely from now on do better. And if we learn, that's how things start changing in this reincarnation, correct? Sometimes we feel like, yeah, I didn't. We feel so guilty that guilt becomes so toxic instead of helping us doing better, right? So
exactly.
There is a fine line there, right, Edward?
Right. Yeah. Guilt doesn't do anything except make us feel guilty.
Exactly. Kind of stay in the same place for too long.
Right.
So
that's right.
Let's do good things forward, and that helps. Okay, one more question from Luis Leon. Considering everything that happens, do you see the possibility that they might not all be consequences and that a number of them come from chance?
You know, it's, without trying to repeat myself, it's very tempting to think that things happen by chance. It's very easy to just feel like, you know, it just happened and I don't know how it happened. But, you know, I'm often surprised that as a musician, I love to read about the early lives of musicians. And you see that these people didn't come from nowhere. They were born in a certain kind. They were born in a family, and you might think that, well, it's just by chance that Chopin became a great pianist, but chance doesn't really play it. It doesn't play out in our life that way. The circumstances of our life, maybe it's obscure, maybe it was a neighbor. It could have been something that you really forgot. But I think chance is kind of an easy way out to say that this just happened by chance, and I have no responsibility for it. And you know, so we have. I think the idea of reincarnation is it constantly asks us to look inward and to question, what am I doing here? Why is this happening? Why do I feel this way? Why, you know, these kinds of questions help. We won't know, like a movie, what circumstances brought about those feelings, but we can recognize those because these things are getting carried. This is where the immortal soul comes in. All of these things, our conscience and our innate ideas and our feelings and our impressions and our interpretation of things are all part of our spirit, of our inner life. And this is the responsibility, because all that stuff is covering up the divine within us, really. And so when we allow ourselves to start peeling away those occurrences that happen to us, we can start to see you know, who we really are instead of who we think we should be, or the impression that we want to give to people, and even worse, the impression we want to give to ourselves. You know, yeah, I'm a good person. Yeah. These things that we say to ourselves constantly, and really prevent us from seeing things. So chance and mystery, as attractive as they are, they if we look at them strictly 100%, this was 100% chance, because there I mean, I can see how there might be misfortunes, and we might have played a very, very tiny role in that misfortune. But our job is not to look at the 99%. Our job is to look at the 1%, to look within us.
Yeah. Well, especially those things that keep happening to us, you know, kind of repeated lessons. And you go, but why me? And why again? Right? Well, we haven't learned the lesson yet, right? Because besides those, the consequence, I guess people just think about previous lives. And sometimes also there are those trials, the new trials, right? That we're planned for this life.
Yeah.
And it's not by chance, that's for sure. They are there for a reason, for us to always learn, right? Very good. Let's see, one more question. Okay. When we look at our lives and our tendencies, can we have a clue of previous lives or things we are here to work on?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is just yes, you can. Yes, you can, and this is what we've been talking about in the past couple of questions. When we think that, when we want to look at our past lives and say, well, who is this person, and what did I do in a past life that made me here? This stuff is a distraction. This is like a party game that people like to play. You know, this person was this person in the past life, and you know, we're here to uncover the divine within ourselves, and that divine is our immortal spirit that we carry from one life to another, and each time we come back, we have those memories. I mean, I shouldn't say memories because that gets a little confusing, but we do have that residual understanding that's kept in our conscience. And, you know, we think that right and wrong is just right and wrong, but then you start to realize everyone's version of right and wrong is not the same. Far from it. In fact, you know, you won't get two people to agree on everything when it comes to right and wrong. And that has to do with the stuff that we've learned from the past that is part of our conscience. So I'm sorry, can I see the question again? Because I think I might have missed one element of the question here. So that we have a clue of our previous lives. As I said, yes, you have a clue. You will not have a movie of your previous life. You will not know, you know, whether you were a king or a pauper, that kind of thing. But you will have that innate sense of your individuality, of that you had a previous life, something happened there, and your job is not to know what happened, but rather to see how it's affecting your immortal soul right now. And what can I do to learn more about myself? And yeah, it's fun and a lot of work, and sometimes very frustrating because it takes years and years and years in some cases to answer these questions.
Yeah. No, that's right. Like you said before, I mean, we forget, we don't remember previous life, thank God, right? Because I don't want to know things that I'm not very happy about. And I like the fact that we have a fresh start, so to speak. It's not fresh, but it feels that way. So, but we can, I mean, sometimes, right, even if we are paying attention, like you said, Edward, in ourselves, in our actions, and our tendencies, like how do I react to things? How do I respond? Well, I don't know my previous lives, but I definitely know the things that I need to work on, because I'm learning about God's laws, where I want to get. I guess that's it, right? We know the direction, and we feel where we are. So like you all said before, even if I don't know everything, I have a clue of how to proceed, how to make it better, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's good. Let's see, one more.
Oh, I see lots of interesting questions there.
Yeah.
You could talk all day on these.
Yes, is always with us. Hi there. So that's a long one. Great reason, dear Edward Christie. I was thinking that instead focusing mostly in explaining the negative aspects of our life, we should also apply our awareness and rationale to positive aspects too, our good traits, abilities, and they're equally a result of our efforts from our past life learnings, and cherish all without feeling too self-congratulatory and exhibit them. Suffering shouldn't be the only way for salvation, right? What do you think?
Well, that's quite a question. I like it a lot. First, I mean, yeah. Let me try to just be as succinct as I can. I think part of the trouble we can get into is like a hypervigilance about ourselves, about always looking and saying, what am I doing wrong? Stop. Well, I have this tendency and I'm fighting against this. You know, if we start to look and flip that view around and look at the good in life and practice the good instead of looking for the bad and trying to avoid it, I think that first of all, that goes a long way. And I think you were saying about focusing mostly on the negative aspects of life, and that's a very true thing. And you see people living a very kind of ascetic life where they're just afraid to do anything to step out of the bounds. Could you keep the question? It was a very complex question that had a lot of interesting points to it. Yes, and you make a very good point too. There was once every time I go back to this situation that happened in a Spiritist center once. Someone raised a hand and said, shouldn't we spend time thinking about how much progress we've made from past lives and in this life? And the whole room swelled in revolt against this idea. But no one has been able to really, you know, including myself, to find out what's the problem with that? What's the problem with the idea of sitting back in your armchair and drinking a cup of tea and saying, you know, I used to be that kind of person, but look at the person that I am now. And there is certainly changes that happen in our life, and we can admit them. But we really have to guard against this idea that, you know, I used to do that and I don't do that anymore, because there's many different influences in our life. You know, especially now, as I'm getting older. Today's my 67th birthday, so you know, I had a lot of fire in me when I was a young man, and you know, and those things that upset me back then don't upset me now. But that doesn't mean that I've overcome them. It just means that my whole attitude has changed, and I've started to see that life isn't just a matter of black and white and being the way that I want it to be. And so I don't have to congratulate about myself. I think part of it just has to do with the aging process and becoming comfortable with yourself and comfortable with life around you and accepting the things that are here. So suffering, to me, suffering is saying you've missed the opportunity to really learn about something in your life. You're fighting against something that's going to come back. It's going to be there all the time. You know, until you admit that this is something that is part of your life, it's part of who you are. And it's very difficult, believe me. We're not all, you know, we all suffer every day. I can tell you, I can sit around and tell you all the things that happen, and it causes, I didn't sleep the other night because of a very heated discussion I had with my coworkers. And I didn't realize what happened. And I went to a Spiritist meeting and I blew up because someone said something that irritated me. I didn't even realize what happened. And then I had to try to put all the pieces together. Like, why did I blow up at the Spiritist meeting? Because of something happened during the day, because I didn't admit it to myself. So, you know, there's suffering that happens to us that we're kind of unaware of. And that's what, you know, when things like that happen, when we blow up or something, it doesn't come out of nowhere. That's a consequence without a cause. There's no such thing. Yeah. They go together, and it's our job. It doesn't have to be suffering, but the suffering comes about, and you make others suffer because of our unawareness, of our ignorance. I mean, I'm not crazy about that word, but you know, it's our unawareness in a kind of way.
Yeah. Well, when we can learn it through love, that's even better, of course, right? And I like this reasoning from Yasko about, yeah, definitely. Sometimes the patting on our back help us move forward, right? Because otherwise it gets very heavy, right? We definitely know we have so much to learn. Even if this now is a little better version than I was in previous lives, we know we still have, but not feel so guilty or so helpless that then we can really not do too well. So when we think about, okay, we are a product, like you said, of all these reincarnations. That means that we also have good traits right now. We are learning, right? So it's definitely an important thing to remember. It helps us go forward. I like that reasoning together, all of us thinking together here. It's great. Thank you, Yasko. So we have one more question from Gregory Bennett. Could seemingly chance events be the result of the influence of guiding spirits?
Well, again, this is also a very tricky point to make, because it's a way. I mean, we are always guided. We know that we're constantly being influenced by the incarnated and the disincarnated. We understand this, and there's no way around that. I mean, we are influenced by people. I know there are some times that I've given the same lecture to 2 different spiritist groups, and one time everything just flows, and the other time I feel like I'm trying to swim through honey. I just can't get my points across, and I'm saying, well, how did that happen? Is that me? Is that, you know? But we're always being influenced by the energy around us, by the vibrations, however you want to think about it. So you know, again, if we think about events as chance events, then it's easy for us to just push them to the side. You know, say, well, that was just something happened by chance, and I don't have to do that. But I guess because Gregory's saying seemingly chance events, I would agree with you. You could see them as chance events, but you have every opportunity to look at something that appears on the surface to be a chance event, to actually be something that's coming, that an influence from the outside. Just because we're always influenced by what's happening around us, and being sensitive to that too is a great thing. I often thought there was a period where I had a really poor attitude about lectures, and I said, you know, you spend all this time preparing for a lecture or listening to a lecture, however you want, whichever side, whether you're listening or you're giving one. And then everyone just goes on to live their life. It's like, it's all done. But, you know, those moments that we spend doing this type of thing have an effect on us. It's a small effect. It's like one time I read, if we jump off, you know, if we jump and land on the earth actually moves, but it's so small that we can't measure it. And it's the same thing with all these influences, whether you're attending a lecture or whether you're talking to someone, or you know, what's happening around us. And that's why it's so important to be people focused instead of what would you call it, thing focused. You know, a lot of times I lead a group in my at my job, and I realize that if I just focus on the task and there's something going on in the group, it's the group first. It's what's going on around you that comes first. And where you're going is just an excuse for everyone to get together.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the question, because I was thinking as you were replying that if it's an influence from the guiding spirits, they are planning, You know, so definitely it's not by chance that anything happens, right? I mean, there is this whole thing happening in the invisible world that they are planning the way they're helping us for us to move forward. So if you are able to feel the influence and let it happen, help us, definitely it's not by chance. It's because we are connected. It's because there is an action behind everything, right? Even if it is just because our trained to do so. That we are able to connect the same way that we are attracted to certain things by the law of attraction. Well, they are all related to who we are, where we're going, and what we are trying to achieve, right? Our free will, things, our choices, right? So it's so dynamic that, yeah, it's not something that out of the blue something happens.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like you said so well, the logic, because we definitely, everything is happening, it's influencing the next and changing and moving, you know.
Yeah.
It's always dynamic. It's great to think that way. So we are part of deciding our happiness or unhappiness or suffering or everything. We are in charge, which is wonderful.
Right.
And hard, because it's so much easier to blame somebody else sometimes, right? Not our own responsibility.
Yeah, well, we're in charge, but it's like someone ringing the doorbell. We can choose to open up the door or not. Exactly. In that way, we're in charge, but we're not in charge of who's ringing the doorbell. And so, you know, all of the influences around us are there for us to use, and we're the gatekeepers of all of the influences and experiences. And that way we do, but the influences are there.
Yeah.
They're always
we decide which door to open, right? I mean,
right.
Good and bad, and which one we want to hear. That's our choice too. So it's a cool image. Yeah. Okay, let's see one more. We have time.
Beautiful question.
Robert, the process as described seems a little mechanical based on our efforts. When is it appropriate to ask for help from high spirits? What is the role of God's grace?
I love this question. It's, you know, when I'm faced with a problem, one of two things happen. Either I sit down, or whatever, usually I lay down, but I'm there and I'm saying, how am I going to do this? What am I going to say? What's my response? How am I going to handle this situation? What is the person thinking? How can I manipulate it so that it works out for me? I mean, we can go on with all these questions. And usually what I do, you know, I spend a lot of time doing this. And then I remember, I don't know why it takes me, you know, sometimes an hour to remember, or sometimes a day or so, or a week to remember, stop doing that. Stop doing that. Ask. When I pray, instead of sitting there trying to say, you have to figure out what's going on, I just give in. It takes a long time because there's a hardness in my heart that stops me from asking that question. I still want it my way. I feel hurt, or I feel upset, I feel angry, I'm in a bad situation, I want to fix it, and I have this hardness. And when I soften that, and however long it takes, as I said, I think it's a long time, when I soften it and I just ask the question, what should I do? I mean, in my case, even though it takes a long time, I get an answer immediately. And I could tell you as a general rule, the answer is always, what would love do? It's, you know, you want your way. You want to convince someone that you're right. And that's when we stay in our head. But as soon as the hardness in my heart softens a little, the answer that comes back and says, what's the loving thing to do? And you know, and of course the answer comes back right away. That's not just the answer. There's more to the answer than that, because depending on the situation. But when you can start to hear that answer, that's God's grace working in our life. we're getting this answer not because of anything we did, not because of how good we are, not because of all the work we've done. We got an answer because we softened our heart so that God's grace could work in our life.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess we can always ask for the help. That's sometimes we go, if we do that prayer before going to bed, right? I mean, sometimes we wake up and go, oh, okay, now I know, right? Again, it's not them doing for us, right, Edward?
No.
Or not the high spirits, not God, but it is that inspiration. But the connection is always important. So, and sometimes somebody will start saying, oh, I needed to ask your opinion. When I hear that, or immediately, I kind of, I do this quick connection. I say, okay, help me out here.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to really say more than you should, less, or something that's not going to be helpful. So every time, because sometimes people think that praying is a long act, or, connections can be really quick,
Very
right?
quick. Very quick.
And very helpful for us to make better decisions. But
Right.
anyway, that's good. I think we have time for one more. Glaucio, how can we avoid regarding our difficult family members as enemies from past lives and start seeing them as companions of our spiritual journey?
Well, the short answer is to accept our part in being an enemy. That's that to me, because it's not that it's not that you're doing just fine and there's someone that's causing you trouble in your life. In some way, so however small it is, in some way, we've all participated in these events. And all participated in the situation, and it's hard, as I said in the prior answer, it's really the hardness of our heart that prevents us from tearing down the wall of other people, of the enemy, because we want the other person to, justice or whatever's in our heart, that we want that other person to say we're right and that they were wrong, whatever it is. And it's so beautiful. Sometimes you see those movies where, or hear stories of people who haven't seen a family member in years and years and years, and then suddenly one of them, their heart softens and they go and they ring the bell, and but it takes that time. We have to allow ourselves the time, and in the same breath, we can't just be sitting there waiting for something to happen for us. It requires us to look inside and say, what did I do to make this situation come about the way it did? However small it is. And that softens our heart immediately, I think. That's where the justice and the mercy that I was alluding to at the end, we always have to try to figure out how we balance those two things. Because we usually, we do, as humans, we fall on one side or the other. And mercy doesn't mean overlooking things. Mercy is talking about love. And justice as well is love. Justice gives us a chance. That's why, if you think about what happens when someone gets put in jail, they're actually given a chance to calm down, slow yourself down, look inside yourself. This is all you have to do. This is your job now. So both of those things operate in our life, and when the mercy finally operates, that's usually when our heart opens up. At least that's what I found.
Questions, and so little time, but we'll have you back sometime soon. So we'll continue this conversation. It was very, very nice. Everybody's very grateful for the lecture and the answers. Before we go towards the end, And I'm going to ask at the end if you can do our final prayer. So you kind of finish with your touch there for us. I have some announcements that I would like to make. Next week, we are going to have our live, that will be May 29th, again at 11 a.m. as every Saturday, with Beatriz Lopes speaking about strange morals. So don't miss next week. We continue with our lives. But also, very important to save the date, we are having on the June 5th and 6th, our 15th U.S. Spirit Symposium that will be virtual. And the theme, it will be very interesting. It will be about the mediums and mediumship, and also in celebration of the 160th anniversary of the Mediums book. So we're going to be having talks, roundtable discussions, Q&A, and youth panel discussing about different aspects of mediumship. And we're having also, with the presence of Edward and some other friends, the session Spiritism Ask Me Anything, or AMA. Please send us your questions about Spiritism, of all topics that you may think. You can send your questions in the symposium website or the Facebook page. Okay, so remember, June 5th and 6th, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Save the date. And now, for us to end this live, we are going to ask Edward to close for us. And thanks again, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Heavenly Father, this gathering today of friends in spirit, friends in love, friends in generosity, and especially friends in spirit, knowing that we are here sharing our love, our life, our experiences that you so generously allowed us to have. Guide us always to stay united in friendship and in love. Thank you, and so be it.
Have a wonderful weekend and great celebrations.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks
Bye.
for Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.